What if I told you that the man who would become history's greatest comeback story was once so broke he couldn't afford a single meal for 3 days straight? What if I told you he failed not once, not twice, but 7 times before discovering the one secret that would transform him from a nobody into a legend whose name is still whispered with reverence today? Stick around, because what you're about to hear will shatter everything you think you know about failure, success, and the incredible power hidden inside every single setback. Once upon a time in the bustling streets of Chicago in 1923, there lived a man named Thomas Hartwell. Now, Thomas wasn't born into poverty, mind you. His father owned a modest but successful haberdashery, and young Thomas grew up believing that success was simply inherited, passed down like a family heirloom from father to son. But life, as it often does, had other plans. When Thomas turned 21, his father handed him the keys to the family business with great ceremony. "Son," his father said, placing a weathered hand on Thomas's shoulder, "this shop has fed our family for 30 years. Treat her well, and she'll treat you well." 6 months later, Thomas had run the haberdashery into the ground. Poor decisions, bad investments in inventory, and a complete lack of understanding of his customers' needs led to bankruptcy number 1. The shame was unbearable. Thomas packed his few remaining belongings and fled to New York City, determined to prove that his failure was just a fluke. He used his last savings to open a small restaurant in Brooklyn. Surely, he thought, people will always need to eat. But Thomas knew nothing about running a restaurant. He burned through his money faster than he burned the steaks, and within 8 months, creditors were pounding on his door. Failure number 2. Now completely broke and sleeping on park benches, Thomas swallowed his pride and wrote to his uncle in Detroit, begging for help. His uncle, a kind man who owned a small manufacturing company, offered Thomas a job as a floor supervisor. "This is my chance," Thomas told himself. "I'll work my way up and show everyone what I'm really made of." For 2 years, Thomas worked diligently, saving every penny. When a competitor's factory went up for sale, Thomas convinced 3 investors to back him in purchasing it. He promised them returns that would make their heads spin. Instead, Thomas's inexperience with manufacturing led to costly mistakes, defective products, and angry customers. The business collapsed within a year, taking his investors' money with it. Failure number 3. Word of Thomas's repeated failures spread through Detroit's business community like wildfire. No one would hire him, no one would invest with him, and no one wanted to be associated with the man who seemed to have a golden touch for disaster. Desperate and humiliated, Thomas hopped a freight train heading west, ending up in the dusty streets of Phoenix, Arizona. In Phoenix, Thomas tried his hand at real estate. The desert was expanding, he reasoned, and surely people would need places to live. With borrowed money, he purchased several plots of land on the outskirts of town. But Thomas had chosen poorly. The land was too far from water sources and too rocky for development. As the desert sun beat down mercilessly, Thomas watched his 4th venture crumble into dust. Literally. By now, you might be wondering why Thomas kept trying. Why didn't he just give up, get a regular job, and live a quiet life? The answer lies in something his grandmother had told him when he was just a boy. "Tommy, falling down doesn't make you a failure. Staying down does." But even grandmother's wisdom couldn't soften the blow of failure number 5. This time it was a mining venture in Colorado. Thomas had heard stories of fortunes made in silver and gold, and he convinced himself that his luck had to change eventually. He invested everything he had and everything he could borrow into a mining operation. For 6 back-breaking months, Thomas and his small crew dug into the unforgiving mountain. They found nothing but rock and disappointment. Sitting in a cold, empty cabin in the Colorado mountains, Thomas hit rock bottom. He was 32 years old, had no money, no prospects, and no one who believed in him. Most devastating of all, he had stopped believing in himself. For 3 days, he sat in that cabin, staring at the wall, seriously considering whether life was worth continuing. But on the 4th day, something extraordinary happened. A young boy, maybe 10 years old, came knocking on Thomas's door. The boy's name was Jimmy, and he lived with his grandmother in a shack down the mountain. Jimmy had heard about Thomas's mining operation and had walked 3 miles through the snow to ask a simple question. "Mister, my grandma says you're the man who never gives up. Is that true?" Thomas looked at this child, this innocent face filled with hope and curiosity, and something inside him shifted. Here was someone who saw him not as a failure, but as someone who kept trying. "Why do you want to know, son?" Thomas asked. Jimmy's eyes lit up. "Because I want to be like that too. I want to be the kind of person who never gives up." That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. Jimmy's words echoed in his mind. The man who never gives up. Was that really how people saw him? Not as a failure, but as someone with persistence? For the first time in years, Thomas began to see his failures differently. They weren't endings. They were education. Each failure had taught him something valuable about business, about people, about himself. The next morning, Thomas made a decision that would change everything. Instead of starting another business venture, he would start something completely different. He would start teaching other people how to avoid the mistakes he had made. Thomas moved to San Francisco and with his last $20, rented a small room above a bakery. He put up a simple sign, "Business consultation. Learn from someone who's made every mistake." People laughed at first. Who would take advice from someone who had failed so spectacularly? But Thomas's honesty was refreshing. He didn't pretend to be successful. He admitted his failures openly and explained exactly what he had learned from each one. Slowly, word began to spread about the man who could help you avoid costly business mistakes because he had made them all himself. His first client was a baker who was considering expanding to a second location. Thomas shared his hard-earned wisdom about understanding your market, managing cash flow, and planning for unexpected challenges. The baker's expansion was a massive success. News of Thomas's unique consulting approach spread throughout San Francisco's business community. Entrepreneurs began seeking him out, not despite his failures, but because of them. They realized that Thomas's education in failure was worth more than most people's education in success. Within 2 years, Thomas had helped over 100 businesses avoid the pitfalls that had destroyed his own ventures. His consulting fee grew from $5 to $50, then to $500. He wasn't just making money, he was building something much more valuable, a reputation as the man who had transformed his failures into wisdom. But failure wasn't done with Thomas yet. In 1929, feeling confident and successful, Thomas decided to invest his consulting earnings in the stock market. He ignored his own advice about diversification and put everything into what seemed like surefire investments. When the stock market crashed that October, Thomas lost everything once again. Failure number 6. Standing on the Golden Gate Bridge on a foggy November morning, Thomas felt the familiar sting of defeat. But this time, something was different. This time, he wasn't alone in his suffering. The entire country was struggling. Millions of people were losing their jobs, their homes, their hope. And Thomas realized that his experience with failure had given him something precious, the knowledge that it was possible to come back from anything. Instead of wallowing in self-pity, Thomas threw himself into helping others navigate the Great Depression. He offered free consultations to struggling business owners, taught workshops on surviving economic hardship, and wrote articles for newspapers about maintaining hope during difficult times. His message was simple: failure is not final unless you let it be. During these dark years, Thomas met Eleanor, a librarian who had lost her job but not her spirit. She was organizing community support groups for unemployed workers, and she asked Thomas to speak to them about resilience. Their partnership in helping others eventually blossomed into love, and they married in a simple ceremony in 1932. Eleanor brought something to Thomas's life that he had never had before: true partnership. She believed in his mission and helped him see that his failures weren't just personal education, they were preparation for helping others. Together, they developed a systematic approach to business consulting that focused on learning from mistakes rather than avoiding them entirely. But fate had one more test in store for Thomas. In 1935, Thomas and Eleanor invested their life savings into opening a consulting firm with several partners. For 3 years, the business thrived. They had offices in 5 cities and dozens of employees. Thomas finally felt like he had achieved lasting success. Then in 1938, Thomas discovered that his business partners had been embezzling money from the company. Overnight, the firm collapsed, taking Thomas's reputation and finances with it. Failure number 7. This time, Thomas didn't despair. He had learned something crucial from his previous 6 failures. The true measure of success wasn't avoiding failure, but how quickly you could learn from it and move forward. Within a week of discovering the embezzlement, Thomas was already planning his next move. But this time, he did something he had never done before. He sat down and wrote a detailed analysis of all 7 of his failures. He identified the patterns, the mistakes he had repeated, the warning signs he had ignored. More importantly, he identified the lessons he had learned and how each failure had made him stronger and wiser. That analysis became the foundation for what Thomas would later call the failure blueprint, a systematic method for turning setbacks into comebacks. The blueprint consisted of 7 principles. Each one learned from one of his failures. From failure 1, he learned the importance of truly understanding your market. From failure 2, he learned that passion alone isn't enough. You need practical skills. From failure 3, he learned the dangers of over-promising and under-delivering. From failure 4, he learned the critical importance of location and timing. From failure 5, he learned that hope must be balanced with realistic planning. From failure 6, he learned never to put all your eggs in one basket. And from failure 7, he learned the absolute necessity of choosing trustworthy partners. Thomas began sharing the failure blueprint through a series of lectures, and something magical happened. Business leaders from across the country began inviting him to speak at conferences, universities, and corporate events. His message resonated because it was authentic. He wasn't theorizing about failure, he was speaking from deep personal experience. By 1940, Thomas Hartwell had become one of the most sought-after business consultants in America. His book, The 7 Failures That Led to Success, became a bestseller. Universities created courses based on his methods. The man who had lost everything 7 times had become a legend in the business world. But perhaps the greatest testament to Thomas's transformation was what happened during World War II. When the government needed help organizing industrial production for the war effort, they called on Thomas. His experience with failure had taught him how to anticipate problems, plan for contingencies, and turn obstacles into opportunities. The factories he helped organize produced the materials that helped win the war. Thomas Hartwell died in 1967 at the age of 76. At his funeral, over 2,000 people attended, including business leaders, politicians, and ordinary entrepreneurs whose lives he had touched. The boy who had once asked Thomas if he was the man who never gives up, now a successful businessman himself, delivered the eulogy. Jimmy spoke about how Thomas had taught him that failure isn't the opposite of success, it's the foundation of success. Today, business schools around the world still teach Thomas Hartwell's failure blueprint. His story proves that our greatest failures can become our greatest strengths, but only if we have the courage to learn from them rather than be defeated by them. Now I want to hear from you. Thomas Hartwell's story proves that failure isn't your enemy, it's your teacher. But here's what I'm curious about. What's the biggest failure you've ever experienced? And what did it teach you? Drop a comment below and share your story. You never know who might need to hear about your comeback journey today. And if Thomas's story inspired you, make sure to like this post and share it with someone who might be going through their own failure right now. Sometimes all someone needs is to know that failure isn't the end of their story. It might just be the beginning of their greatest chapter. What failure are you ready to transform into your foundation for success? Let's discuss it in the comments below.